Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IEA's latest Big IdEAs event. I am very honored to have the opportunity to introduce today's guest. We are so honored to have Mr. Dan Brouillette, the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy. Just to give you the heads up that this event is live streamed across the world. So this is I said a great honor for several reasons. First of all, to have Mr. Secretary with us. Second, several months ago, when I have invited Mr. Secretary, I told him that we were hoping that our Big IdEAs event will be done in our new premises. And this is the first Big IdEAs event which is hosting Mr. Secretary. It is a great honor for us, Mr. Secretary, that you came here and also our first speaker in our new building, new home. Many of the colleagues in the energy sector are familiar with the fact that in the energy sector, almost no project finishes on time and on budget. But our renovation here finished on budget and before time. Wow. So this is the what we have promised to our member countries. It finished, we didn't pay a penny more, and we came here, we moved here just before time. It was such a great honor to have our governing board meeting 2 weeks ago, chaired by Ambassador Oye, here in this new room, and also to host you here, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, before I start the event, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you because of something which is very close to my heart, which is football, the soccer. The U.S. women national team became the champion of the World Cup, their victory, and this is the fourth time in the history. It's a great victory for United States, and it happened in France, here in the country we are in. So congratulations to you and to your people for this great victory for the American ladies. We have several of them here with us.
Thank you, Fatih.
This is definitely a great achievement. Now, another achievement is on energy. Today, we see that the United States is definitely a global leader on many aspects of the energy. And I will go in a moment, but this is something happening in the United States, but affecting the entire world, from it is neighbors to Asia, Africa, Europe, and elsewhere. So therefore, it is very important to understand what is happening in the United States. So everything important, but one thing is critical to understand: the shale revolution in the United States. Huge. It is affecting everybody. Every single citizen, every single country, every single company around the world. I was telling Mr. Secretary over lunch that some 10 years ago, almost, in our flagship publication, World Energy Outlook, we were the first one in the world who said that a silent revolution is happening in the United States. At that time, people even didn't know what shale is all about. And now that shale revolution is affecting all of us. In terms of oil, gas, United States is the top producer of the world. In terms of oil, in the next 6-7 years, about 70% of the global oil production growth comes from United States. In terms of natural gas, LNG, everywhere. Europe, Asia, Africa, US LNG, and providing diversity, security for many citizens in the world, and good news, puts downward pressure on the prices, which is good for the citizens to get energy cheaper. But it is not only oil and gas. We know that oil and gas, big achievements there, but also in the renewable sector. Both wind and solar energy, very strong growth we see there. Overall in the United States, but also some of the states were stronger than the others. In terms of wind, we see in, for example, Texas making major achievements there, as well as Oklahoma. In terms of solar, California, we are seeing a major penetration of renewables also in the United States. These successes in the energy sector, of course, in the United States helps the economy in terms of jobs, in oil, in gas, in renewables. They have huge spillover effects throughout the economy. Now, these are all good, but as we have highlighted in our reports, there are some challenges. One of them is, as we said in our last oil report, pipeline bottlenecks. This is an important issue. I mean, you may produce oil, but as long as you don't have enough pipeline capacity to bring it to the ports to export, you cannot increase the production. You need the pipelines, and we know that the existing pipelines as of today may not be enough or cope with the increase of the production in the United States. So this is an important challenge to develop the pipelines. And again, as we have highlighted in our reports, the U.S. power transmission system is segmented. It is important to bring them together, and it may create some issues, this segmented power transmission system, in terms of the impediments. Now, this morning, Mr. Secretary gave a very impressive speech on the role of nuclear power, an area that is a concern to International Energy Agency, because the United States has been the leader of nuclear power industry years and years. But currently, what we are seeing is that the appetite for new nuclear power plants, or even the getting lifetime extensions for the existing plants, are not as high as one, at least IEA would like to see, as nuclear power provides low carbon electricity and providing base load as well. Another area that the United States and Mr. Secretary plays a critical role here is taking the lead, is a very important technology: carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is a very important technology if we are serious to find a marriage between our current energy system, which is more than 80% fossil fuel based, and our climate goals. And why US has the lead here? Because the United States, not only in terms of its energy policy, puts an emphasis on CCUS, but also provides financial incentive in terms of tax credits, which is called 45Q in the budget. And if you were to put on the table a project, CCUS, you enjoy financial incentives, and putting such a business model is again a major achievement, I believe, from the US perspective. So, dear colleagues, oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, CCUS, and I'm sure many other technologies, United States is a leading country, working together with different countries around the world, and of course, a very important member of the International Energy Agency. And today we are extremely fortunate, as I said, to have the Deputy Secretary of Energy, Mr. Dan Brouillette. Just, I think everybody knows Mr. Brouillette, but just to tell you that he has over 3 decades of experience both in public and private sector. He held several top executive positions in the private sector and also within the government, including Chief of Staff to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Energy, as well as an Assistant Secretary of Energy for Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs from 2001 to 2003. In addition, he is a former state energy regulator and served as a member of the Louisiana State Energy Board between 2013 and 2016. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Mr. Dan Brouillette.
Thank you, Fatih. Thank you, Fatih, for that kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today in these wonderful, outstanding, fabulous new facilities of yours. They are truly, truly impressive. It's great to be here with you, and it's also a pleasure to be with all of you as well. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you some of the good work that we are doing at the U.S. Department of Energy on an issue that we think is so critical and crucial to the future success and security of global energy. Infrastructure, apart from this beautiful facility, Fatih, isn't always a glamorous issue to talk about, but it's an absolutely fundamental one. But before I begin, I'd like to take a moment and reflect on the timing of this event and the nature, in particular, of the U.S.-French relationship, I should say. Just this last weekend, I spent the 4th of July in my own nation's capital, surrounded by my family. And as a former military man, it's during moments like this when I'm so thankful for the freedoms that we enjoy in America, and in particular, the freedoms that my children enjoy. And it's now my privilege to be here in Paris to discuss and to share with you a few thoughts during this time leading up to Bastille Day. You know, throughout history, from the influence of the French Enlightenment thinkers on the American founding fathers, through the American Revolution and the French Revolution, to the beaches of Normandy and beyond, the common thread that binds our two nations is indeed the cause of liberty. And I wish you well, as my French colleague over there, I wish you well as we head into these Bastille Day celebrations. We talk a lot about the way energy has the ability to revolutionize a country's security, its economy, and indeed its very sovereignty. And I'm proud to serve my nation as we drive energy innovation to unleash the freedom that is afforded by abundant and secure energy in our modern world. In the United States, our energy renaissance over the last decade has been nothing short of a game changer. It's been a job creator through a recession, a boon to consumers' pocketbooks, and a geopolitical asset. We can now support our friends and allies by providing a reliable source of energy, the lifeblood of every economy. But without infrastructure, as Fatih pointed out, the potential of true energy security can go unrealized. Around the world, global energy is undergoing a seismic change thanks to evolving demographics, fluctuating economies, climate patterns, and technological breakthroughs. These transformations are shifting how we approach energy, how we acquire it, and how we use it. As energy evolves, so too does our demand for the infrastructure necessary to transport and deliver that energy. Simply put, our changing energy landscape will result in trillions of dollars of new infrastructure investment. And like other forms of infrastructure, America's energy infrastructure is a key driver of employment, growth, and competitiveness throughout our economy. Maintaining a modern, flexible, and secure network of electric power transmission and distribution lines, oil and gas pipelines, and storage facilities is essential to keeping energy accessible and affordable for businesses and consumers, to the promoting of growth across all economic sectors, and to supporting the continued health of our country's domestic energy industry. Since taking office, President Trump has prioritized ensuring our infrastructure keeps pace with our energy abundance. He's approving new pipelines, removing burdensome oil and gas restrictions on reasonable exploration, and supporting clean coal technologies. He's reinvigorating nuclear energy while supporting R&D efforts on behalf of renewables, storage, and energy efficiency. And what this means is that for perhaps the first time, the United States is finally embracing a true all-of-the-above energy policy, one that doesn't pick winners and losers, but instead opens the door to new opportunity and innovation. My department, the U.S. Department of Energy, has a distinct and important role in supporting this agenda, and we, along with our partner agencies, work diligently to provide policymakers and other stakeholders with the necessary resources and the technical tools to build secure and resilient energy systems. We are committed to supporting other nations in charting their own energy futures as well, with the goal of achieving real energy security. We think that doing so is critical to advancing the global economy, improving the quality of life for all people, and pursuing opportunity and prosperity. And that means we support and we encourage the infrastructure investment of our friends and our allies. Because when global energy markets are supplied with a diversity of energy sources, supplies, and routes, we all become more secure and less dependent on bad actors who seek to use energy dependence for geopolitical leverage. And with energy security comes economic growth and national security. And we take seriously our role as a country with great natural resources and wealth to serve as a good actor on the world stage. With that comes a commitment to strengthening our ties to our friends abroad through energy trade, through participation in organizations like the IEA, and, of course, ensuring the further development of export infrastructure. The U.S. Department of Energy has streamlined the government's approach to LNG export approvals, bolstering the United States' evolution into a major global supplier of LNG and a net exporter of natural gas. Even more, our administration is taking action to further increase permitting efficiencies. For example, just this past April, President Trump issued an executive order to promote energy infrastructure and economic growth. It established the policy of the United States, which is to promote private investment in our energy infrastructure by providing greater efficiency, regulatory certainty, effective stewardship of natural resources, and timely action. Based on the current projections, the United States is expected to become a net energy exporter next year for the first time in nearly 70 years, 7 decades. By the end of this year, the U.S. LNG export capacity is expected to have grown by an astonishing 150% from 2018, possibly reaching 11 billion cubic feet per day of export capacity. That's great news for the U.S., it's great news for the world, but we are not going to rest on our laurels. We are going to look beyond today's infrastructure. The Department of Energy is supportive of industry investment into what is quickly becoming a global petrochemical hub in the United States Appalachian region. In fact, if the states that encompass the Appalachian region of the United States were to be an independent country, it would be the 3rd largest gas producer in the world. And that region alone is expected to produce 40% of America's natural gas supply by 2040. It also produces gas that is particularly wet, meaning that it contains substantial volumes of ethane. And by 2025, ethane production in the Appalachian Basin is expected to reach 640,000 barrels per day, which is 20 times greater than the region's production in 2013. A new ethane cracker plant is already under construction in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, while another is under consideration in Ohio, and that is only the very beginning. This petrochemical production is not only a boon to our own manufacturing industry, but it will go a long way toward meeting the global demand for these products, which in turn will support the burgeoning manufacturing industries in other nations that are crucial to economic progress and the movement of more people out of poverty and into the middle class. As we seek joint success in achieving energy security over the coming decades, it will be underpinned by innovation. Innovation will allow us to produce cleaner and more abundant, more affordable, and more diverse forms of energy. In the realm of nuclear energy, in 2017, the President announced a review of the U.S. nuclear industry to revive and revitalize the entire industry. At DOE, we're taking his challenge to us very, very seriously, and we're thinking about it both big and small. And what do I mean by that? We are supporting the R&D of advanced reactors, including small modular reactors, or SMRs, and microreactors, which will be more reliable, safe, and easily transportable, and highly efficient systems that can operate for 10 years or more without refueling. We're on a path to construct the versatile advanced test reactor, a facility that would enable development and testing of advanced fuels and materials for the next generation of commercial reactors. We're committed to the role of nuclear in a clean, safe, and secure energy future for the United States, and collaborating with our allies abroad to expand nuclear energy in their own energy portfolios. Another critical mission for DOE is ensuring the resilience of our electric grid and successfully countering the ever-evolving and increasing threat of physical and cyber attacks on networks, data, facilities, and infrastructure. We've established the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response to make our electric power grid and other energy infrastructures more resilient to these threats. DOE recently announced an $8 million investment in innovations that will enhance the reliability and resiliency of our nation's energy infrastructure. And this R&D partnership opportunity will spur the development of the next generation of tools and technology, including artificial intelligence, that will become widely adopted throughout the energy sector. As we protect our infrastructure from cyber threats, we're also working to improve the complete resilience of our electricity systems. Our Office of Electricity also supports transmission system resilience and generation diversity and is exploring new architecture approaches for the electric grid. This includes the development of a North American energy resilience model that will provide unique, groundbreaking, national-scale energy planning and real-time situational awareness capabilities to enhance both security and resilience. In other words, a large component of DOE's work is pursuing cutting-edge innovation in big data and artificial intelligence. We will also be working on grid-scale energy storage based on new technologies that we help to develop. Grid-scale storage will be an important enabler for renewable integration and for clean baseload power. While today's technologies are already providing value to the grid, there are physical limitations to traditional batteries that must be surpassed by next-generation technologies. Efforts in grid-scale energy storage are already producing important advancements. Grid-scale energy storage technologies have been demonstrated using a new generation of advanced flow batteries, which rely on lower-cost electrolytes that have already achieved $275 per kilowatt hour for a 4-hour system. We're also continuing to advance energy storage through our Advanced Energy Storage Initiative, which includes development of a new grid storage launch pad aimed at accelerating materials development, testing, and independent evaluation of battery technologies for grid applications. Another program that's enabling technologies is DOE's Grid Modernization Initiative, which focuses on integrating an increasing amount of variable generation into the grid through R&D infrastructure investments at our 17 national laboratories. One noteworthy GMI effort will accelerate the conversion of National Wind Technology Center campus into an experimental microgrid capable of testing grid integration at the megawatt scale. These are just some of the examples of how the United States is approaching its commitment to updating and improving its energy infrastructure and environmental responsibility within its own borders. But these same issues are also part of the heart, or at the heart, of so many of our partnerships with people around this table and our work abroad. We vehemently believe that a strong and a vibrant transatlantic relationship is crucial for the United States, and that our collective energy security is critical to the national security and the sovereignty of both the United States and the European Union. An energy secure Europe is a stronger partner for the United States as we address global challenges, and we support the EU's efforts to strengthen its energy security and invest in new infrastructure that will open up market access, accelerate trade, and diversify sources of energy and power. We are particularly encouraged by many countries' decisions to reduce their dependence on a single energy supplier. These nations have diversified their energy supply, sources of the supply, and their supply routes, and in many cases by agreeing to purchase U.S. LNG. Germany, for instance, has agreed to purchase LNG from the United States and to finance and construct 2 new LNG import terminals. Poland, as well, is expanding its LNG terminal and increasing LNG imports from other nations, including the United States. In total, 36 countries are receiving American LNG, 18 of which have been added since President Trump took office, including our host country today, France. Secretary Perry and I are extremely proud of the work of the 3 Cs initiative on this front, which serves as a fundamental platform for engagement between the United States, the EU, and other countries in Central and Southeastern Europe. Its goal is to create a north-south corridor in energy, telecommunications, and infrastructure. And this will prove to be a powerful step towards a safer, a stronger, and a more prosperous world for all of us and for generations to come. In keeping with the goals of the 3 Cs initiative, last year Secretary Perry announced the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, or what we refer to as PTEC. Through PTEC, we aim to work across the 3 Cs region to increase energy security, promote energy development and diversity, modernize power grids, bolster the resiliency of energy systems, help detect and to thwart cyber attacks, develop emergency response plans, and promote open, competitive, and transparent energy markets. Its mission is to catalyze investment and expertise from the United States to advance EU goals. For example, the European Commission advocates for the need to eliminate energy islands and to reduce single supplier dependence in much of Central and Southeastern Europe. These, quote, projects of common interest, unquote, play an important role in incentivizing new natural gas and electricity infrastructure. Looking ahead, we envision DOE will continue to work with the European Commission through the US-EU Energy Council, where PTEC initiatives will be discussed and progress on those projects will be noted. Now is indeed an exciting time for energy, and by our very nature, our global energy landscape is dynamic and intrinsically linked to the very tenets of a free and a modern world. It is all of our responsibility to be good stewards of our resources and to work together for the betterment of our people and for the generations that are yet to come. I firmly believe that we are on the right path and should continue to encourage substantial progress in infrastructure development and energy development to fully unleash the potential opportunities and the prosperity that coincide with the next wave of innovation, ingenuity, and entrepreneurship. This path will promote new investment and lead to new breakthroughs throughout the world. A healthy, a modern, and a strong energy infrastructure network is absolutely elemental to a bright energy future. Our agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, is committed to fostering that development in the United States and to supporting our partners and our allies abroad as they take steps to do the same. Let's work together to develop energy infrastructure all across the world Let's collaborate to develop the next generation of clean energy technologies. And let's ensure that our collective energy security exists for future generations. I want to thank you again, Dr. Brouillette, and the IEA for holding this important event, and I look forward to the rest of our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. It was so impressive to hear the developments in the energy sector in the United States. Impressive in terms of how comprehensive it is and how fast it is, and implications for the U.S. domestic economy, U.S. energy sector, and for the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a chance for all of us to ask the views of Mr. Secretary about the U.S. energy market developments, or maybe beyond that, the international energy market developments. If you want to raise a question, please put your tag in the vertical position, and we will get the questions, and Mr. Secretary will answer those. Who would like to start? Yes, please.
Mr. Secretary, first of all, thank you very much for your very inspiring words. My name is Laszlo Varro. I'm the Chief Economist of the International Energy Agency. And what we see on the United States from about 6,000 kilometers distance is some of the best renewable resources in planet Earth, but often located very far from the major cities. And we also see a quite intense interest by private enterprises to build merchant long-distance transmission lines and supply San Francisco from Wyoming, or supply the southern United States from Oklahoma with renewable electricity. But unfortunately, practically all of those projects face very, very long and very burdensome licensing and permitting procedures. So I wonder, how do you see the role of long-distance electricity transmission in the United States, and do you see ways for the administration to facilitate and streamline project development in this field?
Mr. Ambassador, European Union.
Thank you, Fatih, and thank you, Secretary, for briefing us on these issues. You've already had quite some positive comments on the cooperation that we have between the United States and Europe, and I think we're very grateful, and we actually want to intensify, as you are aware, our work under the EU-US Energy Council. In May, we had a major conference which actually looked at some of the issues you actually alluded to, and I would like to get your views on where the real issues are on LNG trade between the United States and Europe. Some of the fact sheets that I have here tell us that the capacity is only used 20-something% in Europe, and there's also obviously infrastructure issues on the other side of the Atlantic. But that might not be the whole story. So what can we do to further increase what is now a very promising relationship, in your view, in the next couple of months? Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brouillette. I'm just writing a note here so I can remember the question. With regard to long-distance transmission lines in the United States, we are either blessed or cursed to have a federalist-type system where we have both federal regulation and state regulation. So we have to work closely with our states and respect the rights that our Constitution and our federal government has given them. That presents, in most cases, opportunities. In some cases, it presents a little bit of a burden, a little bit of a restriction on the development of long-distance infrastructure, which crosses state lines. I don't know that I have a very precise answer with you about the future of long-distance electricity transmission lines. I know that there were several efforts over the course of the last few years to develop them, and some have failed. I do see a bright future, however, for things like microgrids. As we move away from centralized distribution of electricity in the United States and perhaps many of the countries around the table, I see a future for smaller nuclear reactors. I see a bright future for solar. I see a bright future for wind. And I see a very bright future for microgrids. The United States has many parts of the country that are, very rural, much like Europe. And it is much cheaper in many cases to serve those communities, not with a transmission line that runs from Washington State or New York City or any other state in the country, but rather serving them locally with locally produced electricity. So I do see a brighter future perhaps for those types of technologies. We are working closely with several universities in the United States to help them advance those technologies. In particular, the University of Alaska has been very aggressive given the location of Alaska. Again, it's a very rural area. They are very much interested in pursuing these things, and we are working very closely with them to develop the technologies that allow them to do so. We're also working with others in the private industry who would help with the investments in those types of technologies. With regard to the EU and the supply of LNG, the capacity, I think, is one question. The demand is a different question. That depends entirely upon the industries and the consumers in these lands. Fatih and I had a great conversation earlier where we talked about infrastructure development in the United States as well as other parts of the world. In the United States, our production numbers are very, very high, and we expect them to continue for quite some time, perhaps decades. Our own Energy Information Administration within the U.S. Department of Energy, our statistical group, our statistical arm, which is a counterpart and colleague, if you will, to the IEA, tells us that our production numbers should continue through 2040, perhaps as long as 2050. So production in the United States is not really an issue for us right now. It's infrastructure. It's getting the product to market. And what we are working very, very aggressively to do is to build more pipeline capacity, to move it out of places like the Permian Basin in Texas down to the coastline so that we can export that product to market. What that does, I think, in the long run is reduce prices not only for Europe but for Asia as well as we develop export facilities on the western part of the United States. I think we're going to continue to see pricing drop. And as a result, you're going to see utilization of not only U.S. LNG, but also natural gas, liquefied natural gas from other parts of the world increase. You'll see it increase in places like China, certainly in Africa, and other countries around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The second round with the UK, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Fatih, and thank you very much, Secretary, for what has been a really interesting and stimulating presentation. You're very welcome here, and we enjoy listening to your thoughts. I wanted to pick up on the issue of CCUS. I'm not sure it's necessarily well understood just how much the US is doing in this space. We had the United Kingdom hosted a conference in Scotland at the end of last year where we were very pleased to welcome many contributors, including, of course, Fatih, to consider how we can advance these technologies by accelerating investment. And I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more from you on how you see your policies, including in particular 45Q, unlocking some of that investment. Thank you.
Yes, please. Over there, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today and your years and years of public service as well. I'm Dave Turk, the head of the Strategic Initiatives Office here at the IEA, and also an alumni of DOE, as several of us in the IEA Secretariat are. And one of the best parts of the job I found was to be able to be walking in the inner recesses of Forrestal, not just walking in the inner recesses. It's not a nice building to walk in, but for those who have been in Forrestal in DC, but to get a glimpse of some of the really cutting edge technology that makes you step back and say, wow, I didn't know we could do that, or this could be a real game changer if it were able to get to market, et cetera. Not to mention the 17 laboratories, as you said, around the country. And obviously you get a glimpse of what's going on with some of those laboratories. So I wonder if you could give us an example or two of something that you saw recently that really caused you to say, boy, this is really impressive technology. Obviously, some things will require years and years to get to market penetration, but just to give us a sense of some things that made you say, wow, and take a step back.
Mr. Secretary.
Great, thank you for those questions. I appreciate it. Let me go to CCUS first. Again, earlier today, we had a great conversation about the use of fossil energy all across the world, and Fatih pointed out, he reminded me of a statistic that he shared with me some time ago. And forgive me for not remembering the exact year, Fatih, but the point is the same. Decades ago, a study was done that showed that roughly 80% of the world's energy usage was from fossil energy. And as we all know around this table, we have worked very hard, very diligently to develop renewable technologies, nuclear technologies, any technologies that would provide cleaner sources of energy. And over a course of several decades, we learn that the use of fossil energy is still 80%. It hasn't declined very much, if at all, over the course of these numerous decades, perhaps as many as 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 decades. That's going to continue for the next 4 or 5 or 6 decades because the world, in many cases, cannot afford some of the technologies that we're developing. So they're going to continue to use fossil energy. And that's why we feel that CCUS or CCS, depending on how you want to view the technology, is key. It is critical to what we want to do, and that is to have a cleaner energy future. We have worked hard in the United States not only to develop the technology itself, but to create the right incentives for the use of this technology because it is expensive, and it is still not yet economically viable in many parts of the world, including the United States for that matter. So the United States Congress initiated a tax scheme, if you will. It's called 45Q, which is a portion of our U.S. tax code, and it allows credits to be used for the development and the utilization of this type of technology. We have seen the technology deployed in the United States, particularly in a company down in Houston, Texas, where the technology captured, I think, north of 95% of the carbon. So we know that the technology works. We just need to make it more economical. And that's what we're going to do very aggressively in the United States. We're working closely with our coal industry, closely with our oil and gas industry who uses the carbon for enhanced oil recovery as we look at some of these unconventional plays across the United States. But we are very strongly supportive of this technology. We're going to continue to promote it all across the world. We look forward to working not only with our European colleagues, but other colleagues around the world who are interested as well. So it's right at the top of our list of priorities. With regard to the technologies in the 17 national laboratories, it's hard for me to even begin. There are so many things that are going on in our national laboratories. One of the projects I saw just recently was amazing. We're talking today about infrastructure. This technology may make at least some infrastructure obsolete or irrelevant. They're working very closely in several of our laboratories to transport electricity without wires. So think about that for a second. If you can generate electricity in the United States and get it to Europe without a wire, what does that mean to our future? What does that look like? These are real efforts that are ongoing in our national laboratories. They're very futuristic in many respects. Blue sky is what we tend to refer to them because we don't quite know where they're going to lead. But it's very, very important work, very important work. One of the other initiatives that I was happy to see when I was traveling out west in one of our laboratories, that we're doing a lot of work with nuclear materials. And our labs have just developed a fuel source for deep outer space travel. So we think in the very near future we can actually go to Mars and back on one tank of gas based on the work that's being done in the U.S. Department of Energy laboratories. So very, very exciting. The list is very long. I don't want to keep us here all afternoon, but it is a fantastic place to be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. You get the toughest questions from the DOE colleagues.
Your people are very difficult.
Yes, you ask me, so yeah, this is definitely. So now there are several questions. I hope you have some time, Mr. Secretary. Let me go to Australia, followed by a question here. I cannot see the tag here. It is Marc-Antoine. Okay, so Ifri.
Thank you, Fatih, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that presentation. So I'm Nicole Thomas from the Australian Government, and I'd just like to share your sentiments on energy infrastructure. As a country which has a very dispersed population and an energy system, we very much sympathise with the need for ensuring our energy infrastructure is relevant throughout the transition. I have a question on a specific technology, though. So in Australia, we have a ban on nuclear energy at the moment, but our current Minister, Angus Taylor, has said that our government would be open to reversing that should there be a clear business case which showed that the economics were sound. So I guess I'm interested in a bit more of your thoughts about the economics of nuclear and of new builds at the moment. Thanks.
Marc-Antoine?
Thank you, Fatih and Mrs. Secretary. May I ask you about what's the place of Africa in your strategic priorities in the field of energy? We are here in France. For us, Africa matters a lot, especially investments into sustainable electrification. What we've seen in the past years is that clearly there's been efforts, but for example, China is clearly in the lead there. And as the colleague from the European Union mentioned, and yourself, the EU United States Energy Council, wouldn't that be an interesting topic also to work on over the next months, perhaps? And next year we will host in France the Africa-France Summit on Sustainable Cities, because this is clearly a tremendous problem and a clear new priority here. What's your view on these issues? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for those questions. I did have the honor of meeting with the minister from Australia just recently. We had a long conversation about nuclear energy, and he explained to me his views on it quite clearly. And you're absolutely right. There needs to be a business case for any technology to move forward. So I respect his views, and I think they're very well received. What we did share, however, was some of the work that's being done on some of the advanced technologies in nuclear in the United States as well as around the world. Just recently, about almost 7 or 8 months ago, we initiated an effort at the U.S. Department of Energy to create a new fuel for the nuclear industry, high-assay LEU. We call it HALEU, H-A-L-E-U. We think that this fuel is potentially a key to the development of microreactors. And what we would like to do is to utilize some of the fuel that we're going to create in Ohio, the state of Ohio in the United States, and send that over to one of our national laboratories, perhaps the Idaho National Laboratory, so that they can begin some additional work on small reactors. And we're talking about reactors that are perhaps 1 megawatt up to about 5 megawatts. So they're very small in terms of their production. If we can make these projects smaller, the theory is we can also make them cheaper. Initially, they'll be expensive. There's no question about that, because anything that's first of a kind, anything that is this unique will initially come with a pretty high price tag. But we do think that if we can miniaturize some of these facilities, we can make them cheaper. We're also working in the United States to make our regulatory processes much more efficient. We think Canada has a great model for some of these smaller SMRs or microreactors. If we can begin a process of working with our regulators in the United States to have them send earlier signals to the marketplace that some of these technologies are in fact permittable, they can go to the market, we think the market's going to respond very, very favorably. And to your minister's point, we will see a business case develop, we hope, very, very quickly. But that's some of the work that we're doing. We're excited about what we've seen so far. We're probably still 2 to 3 years away. But we're very excited about what we've seen in terms of progress. With regard to Africa, we are very much committed to developing technologies that allow countries in Africa, the African continent generally, to develop infrastructure that's going to be affordable very quickly. In many cases in Africa, as you well know, they can leapfrog some of the technologies that we currently have on the marketplace today. We'd like to see that move along much more quickly. Secretary Perry was there not all that long ago. I think it was sometime last year, and I know he has another visit scheduled very, very soon. It is very disturbing to us to look at the statistics in Africa and learn that the vast majority of the continent does not have access to electricity. We have to fix that situation. It's very, very important that we fix it, and we fix it soon. So we're committed to working with the countries in Africa. We're committed to working with other countries around this table who have similar interests. Our laboratories are open to yours. I know we work closely in places like Germany with the Planck Institute, Munich, and other places to help develop infrastructure technologies that are affordable and can be deployed very, very quickly.
Mr. Secretary, if I may ask a question, you were 17 years ago the Assistant Secretary of Energy.
Mm-hmm. That was 5 kids for me, Bafati.
Five kids.
That's
for
5
you.
kids ago.
Okay. I wanted to ask what else you did here. So what I wanted to ask you is that at that time, United States was a major importer of energy, and now a major exporter of energy. How did the mood in the department, the work, when you go outside international meetings like this one, change? Do you see the difference in the day-to-day work?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's always a rewarding experience to have, the work that you devoted your life to, in many cases of the scientists in our laboratories, be, executed out in the field and be deployed out in the field, and you see the value that your work is bringing to the marketplace. The mood, the attitude, the culture within our U.S. Department of Energy, as well as our other agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interiors, all have specific roles to play in the development of energy in the United States. The mood has not been better that I can see. But it's been an amazing experience for me to watch, in those 17 years. It's been an amazing experience for me to watch the dramatic change in the U.S. energy industry. 17 years ago, Fatih, we couldn't see some of the reserves that we see. I mean, literally could not see them because we didn't have the technology to do the seismic work that we needed in order to see them. And even if we did see them, we didn't have the technology to actually reach, those sources of energy. Today we do. And it is a very, very exciting time, not only for the United States, but I think for the entire world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. If the colleagues don't know, Mr. Secretary is a very hardworking statesman, and the Department of Energy and other parts of the administration, public sector, and he's at the same time a very good father of 9 wonderful children. So a lot of work there as well. So to look after them, I meant. So may I now go to United States?
Thank you, Fatih. Secretary Brouillette, thanks so much for joining us here in Paris. And I'm going to take advantage of this to get you to share even more ideas with us, because I find this fascinating, and you could go in many different directions. But I want to take us back to infrastructure here as perhaps it's not quite as exciting as some of the technology investments that you talked about and things that are coming down the road. And as a fan of things like Star Trek, I always like to think of the future and the wonderful things we could do. But sometimes it's the hard grind of getting the infrastructure in place. And I'm curious to have your views on what are some of the bigger obstacles to putting the infrastructure in place? Is it a question of financing and we have to do a little public money and leverage private sector money? Or is it more regulatory? Or do we come down to questions of public acceptance of whether it's a pipeline or something like that? And then what is the role, as you address these different things, that DOE can play in the United States and then the IEA and the rest of us globally? Thanks.
Question over there. Yes, please.
Thank you, Fatih. Paulo Frankel, I'm the head of the Renewable Energy Division here at the IEA. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for an impressive speech. What impresses me is not just the scope of the U.S. energy transition, but the rapidity. And I have one question on one enabling infrastructure for variable renewables. You very interestingly mentioned grid-scale storage. How fast do you see this coming? Do you plan some specific policies to foster that? And do you see a technology race in this field with hydrogen? Thank you.
Great. First, with regard to the first question, it's a little bit of all of the above, to be honest. It's a little bit of financing, it's a little bit of regulatory burden, a little bit of a regulatory system that is in some cases a little antiquated and in need of update. It is in some cases public acceptance. We see that perhaps most acutely in the northeastern part of the United States. You know, we talked a little bit about climate change and a little bit about the reduction of carbon emissions in the United States. We're very proud of the record that we have over the course of not only the last decade or perhaps two, but all the way back to 1970. We have a great record, a great story to tell. As I mentioned in one of the earlier conversations today, our economy has grown by 275% since 1970. 275% increase in the size of the U.S. economy since 1970. And during the same period of time, our emissions, critical climate emissions, have gone down by 74%. That's an incredible story to tell. But there are blips in that record, and what we see are when events happen in places like the Northeast. Most recently, a cold weather event happened in the Northeast. We see the emissions increase. And the reason that we think they increase is because they don't have access to natural gas. And the reason they don't have access to natural gas is because the state of New York will not permit a pipeline to run from the Marcellus Shale, which is in the Appalachian region that I spoke of earlier, through the state of New York into Boston. So the people in Boston utilize heating fuels, heating oil, to heat their homes in the wintertime. And that's not the right answer. You know, the right answer for Boston is to utilize natural gas, or if not natural gas, then some other form of clean fuel, you know, or some renewable technologies, be it wind or solar. But those are the types of, you know, impediments that we see to the development of infrastructure in the Northeast. Now, there are other parts of the United States where we're just trying to catch up. So in places like Texas, where the production of oil has always been strong, but it's never been stronger than it is today. And as anyone who understands the oil development business, the oil production business, there's gas associated with the oil. So you have to get rid of the gas. You can't flare it. You can't burn it off, or at least you shouldn't. You have to get rid of the gas, but if you don't have a pipeline to move that gas to a facility, then you can't produce the oil. And what we're doing is we're playing catch up in places like Texas. So while there aren't many regulatory burdens or even financial concerns in places like Texas, we just have to go faster, or else, you know, our production of oil will suffer as a result. So it's a little bit of everything. But I'm happy to report that the development is very strong right now, all across the United States, with the possible exception of the example I mentioned in New York. But we'll get there with Governor Cuomo and some others. We're working very closely with this state. With regard to grid scale storage, we're excited about the possibilities that hydrogen provides in this regard. But perhaps in the interim, we're going to look at some of the battery technologies that we're working on. You know, lithium has been a great technology for batteries over the course of the last decade or so, or perhaps longer. But it's reached its limit, and I don't think that it has the ability to do grid scale storage. We're looking at things like magnesium ion, other technologies that we've been working on in our national laboratories that have much better storage capacity, much better storage capabilities than lithium. We think you know, best case scenario, knock on wood, the scientists will kill me if I say or pin them down to a number, but you know, I'm optimistic, and I would suggest that within the next, you know, year or so, we're going to have a major breakthrough in battery technology that's going to produce the scale that we need to make renewables truly viable 24/7.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I mean, the developments in the United States are, of course, not only important for US, but also the neighbors. And you have two neighbors there who are also very important members of the IEA, and they are both also energy countries, Mexico and Canada. This North American regional integration is, of course, very important for the IEA and for the global energy markets and energy security. So we are very fortunate to have three very important countries in North America. Coming to Europe, I have now Italy. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Mr. Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary, thank you very much for your presentation, which is really fascinating for us here. I just have a question about cooperation between the US and the EU in energy issues. Of course, the primary structure platform for this cooperation is the EU-US Energy Council, which is, of course, very important for us. At the same time, there is an increasing, if you want, cooperation between the US and a number of member states with different fora, if you want, the 3Cs initiatives, the PTEC, and so on and so forth. As always, in these cases, it's important to take a look at the general, if you want, complementarity between also on the convergence and of these dynamics which are taking place at the moment. So I was wondering whether, I think you touched on this a little bit before in your presentation, maybe if you can give us a little bit more on your thoughts about these different channels of communication with Europe and with European member states. Thank you.
One more question over there on the right-hand side.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for a very interesting presentation. We touched upon the shale revolution a few times. It's now, as Dr. Burrell mentioned, more than 10 years. One of the striking things that we did talk about was the speed with which it's happened in the United States. One of the striking things, looking at the rest of the world, is the fact that not much has happened. I mean, with partial exception of Argentina, you haven't seen those kinds of developments replicated elsewhere. So should we understand from that that the United States is somehow unique, either below the ground or above the ground? Or should we expect to see those kinds of developments replicated elsewhere? I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that.
Okay, great, thank you. With regard to the first question, I think all of these fora are very important. And, I also think, however, our bilateral conversations are important as well. If you think about, the development of technology and what it does to the marketplace, sometimes, great ideas come from these one-on-one conversations or these bilateral technical conferences that we may host from time to time in the United States and in many of your countries as well. But I heard Mr. Levy this morning from EDF say something that I think is very, very important. It's also important that we begin, after we've developed a unique technology that can be groundbreaking or can be revolutionary in the energy world, it's also important that we think about potential standardization of these types of technologies. And I think that's where the broader conversations in these various fora come in. And the reason he pointed out, and I think he's absolutely right about this, is that standardization typically means more efficiency. It means cheaper pricing. It means quicker adoption across, various markets. And I think that's something that we ought to pursue. That's why we're excited to participate not only in IEA, but in the EU, the US-EU or EU-US Energy Council. We think those are very, very important places. PTEC, 3Cs, those types of initiatives that the Secretary has initiated are important for those reasons, but also for the additional reasons of allowing us the opportunity to bring investors to those types of fora so that they can see the work that's being done in your various countries. That's the point of the PTEC initiative. That's what we're trying to do, is to utilize that particular forum to attract investment to these various countries. But both of them are very important. So we appreciate the collaboration that we receive in the big fora, but we also deeply value the bilateral relationships and collaboration that we have as well. With regard to the uniqueness of the United States and its either above ground or below ground uniqueness, I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, I don't know what lies under the continent of Africa, for instance, or the continent of South America. I think there could be huge resources there that we just don't see today. If I had to give you a prediction, though, about what's going to happen, I do think that with the technologies that we are developing along, the other technologies that are being developed around the world, there will be another country that has a similar experience to the United States in the production of natural gas or oil or energy generally. I don't think we're unique in that regard. I can very well see in 10 years or perhaps 20 years a country producing even more natural gas than the United States. And I think it's all due to the fact that we are all willing to innovate and to put our resources into these newer types of technologies.
Mr. Secretary, we are holding you longer than we thought, but last two questions. First, I go to Germany. Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Fatih. Thank you, Mr. Brouillette, for your presentation and your encouraging ideas. And I vividly recall the LNG conference, which we had in Berlin a few months ago, and I think that was very encouraging too. I have very attentively listened to your explanations on new technologies and possible breakthroughs. We do have an intensive discussion in Germany also on climate issues, and of course energy plays an important role in this. And as we are in Paris here, we also, of course, we work against the background of the Paris Agreement. So do you expect from these technological progresses that we will also have a very positive effects for the implementation of the objective of the Paris Agreement? And do you see the future relations of the US with the Paris Agreement being positively influenced by these developments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question here, please, Mathilde.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your great speech, Mr. Secretary. My name is Mechthild Wörsdorfer. I work also in the IEA. I wanted to ask a question about CCS, CCU, because it's one of our key priorities, and we even want to do more work, including in 2020. But the UK ambassador already asked that question. And Fatih's first comments on the success of the US women's soccer team inspired me then to another question, because the US recently joined our program on C3E, which is about empowering women in the energy sector. And it's all about collection of data, disaggregated data, employment, career, and so on in the energy sector. It's also about best practices from governments and companies. So I wanted to ask for your advice what the US is doing as good practice on that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that question. Maybe I'll just start there real quick. I can tell you what I'm doing. And as I look around my office, I think the majority of staff people who work in my personal office or around me most often are all women. And I think that's very, very important for us to do. In the United States, what we are focused on, especially within our department, is STEM education. We feel that there are some gaps in our education system in the United States. And while I don't profess to be an expert in education or in what causes people to choose different fields of study, I just know that we don't have enough women enrolling in some of the STEM, what we refer to as STEM education. That would be the sciences, math, the technology types of curricula that we have available, engineering curricula that we have in the United States. And because of that, the pipeline of women applicants for many of the jobs within our department is simply deficient. And we think it's very important that we fix that. The Secretary has initiated an effort within the Department of Energy to expose very young women, I'm talking high school age, through internships and other programs within our department at our national laboratories so that they can see firsthand what it is that our scientists do, what it is that happens in a laboratory. And hopefully through that process and through those experiences, they will be, or they will initiate or develop some interest in some of these skill sets that we need within our department. But we are very much committed to bringing in not only women, but all individuals, be they from minority groups or other groups, into our department. So we're working very closely with our Department of Education in particular on these types of initiatives. With regard to the question from the gentleman from Germany, the Paris Accords, we think have the right goal. In the United States, we don't oppose a cleaner energy future. We don't oppose a cleaner environment. And I think, some of the narrative and some of the dialogue, in particular around the Accords and our withdrawal from the Accords, has been a bit misguided. When you look at the record of the United States with regard to climate and carbon emissions as well as other types of emissions, things like sulfur or nitrous oxide or other types of emissions that can be harmful to the environment, I think it's hard to argue with the results. As I mentioned earlier, for an economy that has grown at the pace that the U.S. economy has grown over the last 4 decades, to be able to reduce emissions during that same period by 74%, I think is incredible and commendable. And I think that's what the Paris Accords attempt to produce, is those types of results. Unfortunately, when we looked at the accords and we looked at the agreement, the application of the requirements within the agreement didn't strike us as fair or appropriate. There are countries around the world who have economies that are not the size of the United States, but very large, and their emissions are not going down, they're going up. And the accords do not apply any particularly, strict requirements on them. Some of these countries didn't have any requirement until, say, 2030 or 2035, whereas the requirements on the United States would be applied almost instantaneously. So we're not opposed to the goal of what the accords are trying to do. As a matter of fact, we're actually doing it. So we do think it's very important. But that particular accord, we didn't think was particularly balanced in terms of its application.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, I have one final question from me. But before that, to be on the fair side, I have congratulated you for the women's football team, and I have to congratulate Brazil, even the Copa America. So congratulations to Brazil, our family member here. Congratulations, Madam. Mr. Secretary, we are so honored that you came today around 9 o'clock to IEA. It is past 4:15, and you are still with us. Such a great honor for us, for the International Energy Agency, for our secretariat, for our colleagues here. But I would like to finish this wonderful conversation with my traditional question to our distinguished speakers who visit us here for this Big Ideas series. If you want to give me a piece of advice for the next years to come, what would you suggest me to do? Just a piece of advice.
Keep doing what you're doing, Fatih. Just keep doing what you're doing. Your work here at the IEA, you and your staff, as I said earlier, has just been absolutely invaluable. You are a credible voice on energy. You're a credible voice on economics. And just please continue to do what you've always done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And ladies and gentlemen, Secretary was with us, as I told you, 7 hours. Please join me to thank him for his very generous time with us and all this wonderful conversation and suggestions and insights. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much, sir. It was really marvelous. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you.